So our major vision of NTX India is to advance the progress of neurotechnology in India, thereby contributing to India's and world's scientific and technological advancement and serving humanity. We have a huge upcoming events in NeuroTechX India. So I'm so happy about that. So with respect to Neuro Bar, sorry, I think with respect to the Neuro Bar, I'd strongly suggest all the attendees to attend the Neuro Bar, because it's going to be very exciting, and you can let what you're doing to the community, and you can also network with a lot of people. So kindly join the NTX Slack channel, and also mainly the hashtag Neuro2India and hashtag India channel, and wait for the link to Zoom call to be posted there, for the NeuroBar's link, and kindly do not share it publicly, especially for the attendees who are attending today. Once the NeuroBar is open, please join the lobby. Attendees will be placed into different breakout rooms with neurotech enthusiasts, professionals, and speakers, and you can have a really good chat. Feel free, because there's going to be one potential opportunity in Neurotech X events. If you'd like to change rooms, because there are going to be different breakout rooms with different speakers in different rooms. So if you'd like to change room, get back to the lobby. We have our wonderful Brian Jenkins as the gatekeeper. So he'll be assisting you if you want to move to another room. So even if you have some problems, we have lots of NTX people in the webinar. So we are there to help, so don't worry. And our prime importance is to make sure to provide you a very comfortable experience during this webinar. And some quick reminders, you can introduce yourself in the chat sections, and also please utilize the opportunity of asking questions to the speakers, so that we'll get back to you with the answers. And there's going to be a social media contest running. Please use hashtag Namaste NTX India, hashtag NTX Goes DC, and also post it in your social media handles, tagging the speakers and the attendees and the people you know. Creative posts will be really rewarded with the NTX flags. Network, please utilize NeuroBar. It's going to be a strong networking session. And kindly join our community, because this is one wonderful community which completely focuses on the advancement of neurotechnology. And we have a lot of wonderful people ranging from starters to professionals and experts, and also entrepreneurs. So it's going to be really a potential platform for advancing neurotech. So kindly join the community. We'll be posting the joining link to NTX and NTX India in the chat section. So please watch out for that. And for collaborations or partnerships, please reach out to india@neurotechx.com in case if you want to collaborate with NTX India, or if you want to collaborate with NTX Global, please reach out to neurotechx.com. And one final note here is, all of us, neurotech is going to be the future. It's going to be entering every possible field out there. So this is a wonderful platform. Let's join hands together to build the future. Let's time travel into the future in these 3 sessions. That's my final note. And with no waiting, we are going to get our first speaker, Dr. Pia Tikka, to talk about Neurocinematics. Dr. and Professor Pia Tikka is a filmmaker and EU Mobilitas top researcher at the Merit Center of Excellence, Tallinn University. She is also the founder and principal investigator of Neurocine research group, focusing on studying the neural basis of storytelling and creative imagination, a co-member of the directory group of naturalistic neuroscience research project at the Aalto University. She has also contributed to the neuroeconomics as a member of the advisory board in Neuro Service Research Project at the Laurea University of Applied Sciences, funded by Tekels, the Finnish funding agency for innovation. She is also a voting member of the Society for Cognitive Sciences of the Moving Image and European Film Academy. She's also a filmmaker. As a filmmaker, she has directed 2 full and feature films and is actively engaged with Asian stains. Currently, she leads the Inactive Virtual Reality Lab at Tallinn University, focusing on studying the dynamics of biofeedback-driven encounters between human participant and artificial human in cinematic virtual environments. So this is going to be a very interesting talk, and personally, I'm very, very excited, and we'd like to welcome Dr. Pia Tikka on behalf of the whole NTX India and NTX community. Over to you, Dr. Pia Tikka. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the very nice introduction. I'm going to share the video and turn off my own image, but I just want to first say that I'm really excited and happy and honored to be presenting in front of such a great audience with expertise in neurotechnologies. Just a second. So my background was introduced already. I'm Pia Tikka and research professor currently in Tallinn University, Estonia. And my background is in cinema and interactive storytelling and as mentioned in Neurocinematics, which is a brain research paradigm that uses functional neuroimaging methods to study human brain behavior when people watch movies. It is clear that advanced neuroscience methods have provided an exciting window to the human mind. In this talk, I will discuss the narrating mind from the specific point of view of neurocinematics. So what I do, I first I open what I refer to with the notion of human narrating mind. I then discuss neurocinematics and present 2 studies from my neurocine research group very briefly due to the time frame. Then what I want to point out is that despite so far exciting findings in neurosciences, the bottleneck which prevents further advances in my mind is the lack of methods for interpreting the data related to complex world events and subjective experiences. I assume interpretation of multi-source data will be the bottleneck also in future, in fact forever. So this is something we may want to discuss at the end, at the panel discussion. By taking a closer look at the epistemology of this multi-source data, I propose to overcome this challenge at least to some extent. And in this approach, narratives are described as the context that allows access to the mind and against what the interpretation can be formulated. And in concluding, reflections of the future of neurotechnology will be discussed in the light of my talk. Narrating mind. Narratives are assumed as a core construct of enactive sense-making. So this is clearly a wider definition of narrative than typically narrative related to arts and literature. So auto-narration is understood as a pre-conceptual embodied sense-making by simulating situatedness. And shared narration, in turn, is this auto-narration extended to socio-emotional communication. So this all comes together what we may call enactive sense-making. Di Paolo and colleagues describe sense-making as context-dependent, life-motivated, embodied activity. This all presentation and enactive approach relies on enactive cognitive science introduced by Varela, Thompson, and Roche, and then further my own elaborations on enactive cinema, and then in collaborative with Mauri Kaipainen, the elaborations on enactive media. So how can we get access to the narrating mind? Very difficult question. The starting point for this presentation is that by combining phenomenological descriptions of experience and neurophysiological data acquired from brain body measurements together could provide us a window to a narrating mind. And in 1996, Francisco Varela introduced the paradigm of neurophenomenology, which basically aims to find mutual constraints between scientific data and experiential data. And I see that neurocinematics is a kind of sub-paradigm for neurophenomenology. Neurocinematics. So relation of neuro and cinema is an exciting combination, and first of all, it excites the art fields, arts and philosophers. So I want to emphasize that I personally see 2 different lines of connection to neuro and cinema. The first one is the art philosophical approach to human mind, which can be seen exemplified by sci-fi utopia of modernism, like Fritz Lang's image here, Metropolis image here shows. But also a philosophical approach that introduced, for example, by Peter Weibel in last millennium, neurocinema. And then we have a other approach, which is scientific approach for understanding human mind. And here, Yuri Hasson and colleagues have become like pioneers in terms of coining the Neurocinematics term. I founded my Neurocine research group in 2011. My work is especially inspired by the idea of cinema as a model of mind. And here I want to go back to discussions between Eisenstein and Alexander Luria in 1920s. Due to the time constraints, I quickly show two different cases that I may be relevant or may be of interest to the audience. So we were wondering how if narrative content can be differentiated from the form by using neuroimaging methods. So what we did, we showed a Finnish episode from the episode film by Saara Kantel to our subjects.
Äiti. Mitä sä teet?
So here we are basically showing for our subjects a story of a young girl who witnesses her mother's nervous breakdown. What we did, we also synchronized the narrative with the text to synchronize with the audiovisual image, so that when, for example, she shouts, "Mom, what are you doing?" that it takes place same time both in the textual form and audiovisual form. And here we could show, using independent component analysis, we could identify 5 different modality invariant narrative comprehension networks. With modality variety, we mean that these components networks, 5 components networks, were shared across subjects within both these conditions, text reading and audiovisual film viewing. So basically, we kind of overrode the sensory level perceptual functions in the brain, and could identify where actually the narrative content of the story took place. So then another case is where difference in brain activity when watching emotional drama and against experimental film was studied. So we used the same, we showed our subjects an experimental film by Maya Deren at Land. This is an interesting film in that sense that the director herself has argued that she wants to totally get rid of emotions and plot. And then we compared this film with the same film that you saw, the dramatized experience of a young girl witnessing her mother's nervous breakdown. And what we could find using the functional connectivity analysis, we could find differences between these two between brain functions between viewers of these 2 films. And I want to emphasize that, of course, there were also overlapping areas, but what interests us is how they differed. So we could show that the drama film produced higher intersubject synchronization and neural pattern correlation than experimental film. On the other hand, experimental film produced stronger long-distance functional connectivity and higher frontal pole degree distribution than the drama film. So basically, if we want to kind of crystallize what our finding to one sentence, we would say that experimental film requires more cognitive effort, and in addition to that, it also involves auto-reflective, autobiographic areas that are assigned to kind of autobiographic reflections and cognitive efforts. So what is actually my main topic today is the triadic epistemology. So as I mentioned, so it's really difficult actually to work when you work with the complex data to interpret the data in terms of the complexity of the context. So we are looking for model from pragmatist assumption, where we can argue that where two domains of knowledge are not enough to explain each other, but the third is required to provide the interpretative angle. And when we look at consider the neuroscience data, neurocinematic data, so we basically can assume three sources of data, and with film narrative as this multi-layer context data, films basically represent the temporally unfolding complex socio-emotional situations, so they can be compared to life event situations. Films, on the other hand, reduce complexity of such life situations to the essential parameters by means of artistic methods. They rely on established sociocultural conventions and their variations, including, of course, biases. And as this all allows us to assume that films empower a partial similarity of viewer responses. On the other hand, the second domain that we work with is the viewer subjective reports as experience data. So we may assume media literacy to some extent. People have been seeing films and engaged with narratives. We can assume established cultural conventions. We also need to assume sociocultural variants, cultural variants, Western, Eastern worldviews, for example, and then psychological biases. We also do brain measurements as neurophysiological data. So there are intersubjectively shared neural structures, networks, brain areas corresponding to various aspects of film events and their context. And we assume similarities between these viewer responses due to the evolution as biological species and shared sociocultural world. So we assume, like following the original findings by Hasson and colleagues, that there's a greater range of intersubject correlation that can be identified, captured, measured by neuroscience methods when people watch films. So triadic epistemology, basically, we are talking about the complex systems here, which engage a narrative context, subjective experience, and physiological measurements. So just a graph of that tries to model that setup. So we can say that, for example, subjective experience data provides an interpretative window to how narrative context explains neurodata. So two corners are not enough to explain one another. You need a third interpretative angle. Here, on the other hand, narrative context data provides interpretative window to how subjective experience relates to neurodata. So approaching end of my talk. So epistemology of neurotechnology. So what is this then? So to a great extent, this is also an issue in neurocinematics and all naturalistic neurosciences and neuroscience in general, is that we have very good methods to collect neurotechnological data. But how do we map that to the human experience? Of course, like basically we are working with a kind of a general descriptions of experience. And yesterday, for example, we saw presentations where such aspects of human experience were described by relevance, motivation, arousal. But all these mappings are basically very much relying on generalized neurofunctional finding. So individual experiences take place in unique personal context. So how can we get hold of unique personal context? This is a big question of neurotechnology today. So I'm just bringing in this triadic epistemic here, triadic model to kind of challenge everybody here to think of how could we actually get hold of the personal context so that the subjective experience that we argue that we are dealing with when we work with neurotechnological instruments and use them also in social and medical applications, that we can guarantee that we are actually really dealing and working with the subjective experience, really truly subjective and personal context. Yesterday, a speaker spoke about personalization in education. So the key issue really is that how can personal context be accessed and analyzed? And this is a challenge for the whole neurotechnology community. What I want to propose is that to some extent we can have access to personal context via narratives that people tell. And so narrative analysis, studying narrative dynamics as context descriptions could provide one angle to help to meet these challenges. And back to neurophenomenology proposed by Varela, finding mutual constraints between different, often uncommensurable data. So we can have access through phenomenology, which describes experience, first-person experiences, narratology, which allows structural and conceptual models, cognitive science allows us explanatory models, psychology, social sciences, experimental evidence, and neurophysiology, access to the brain-body mappings. So bringing all this together, we may win the game. So conclusion, neurocinematics can be opens new windows to human sense making with references with physiological groundings, contributes to understanding how human mind makes sense via narratives. Epistemic triangulation, in turn, it can be understood as a means of cross-referencing between subjective first-person experience, content description, and neurophysiological data. And once again, narrative as the key to human cognition in general and to creative media practices in particular. And here I want to just say at the end that this is what we try to do in my N-Active virtual lab currently in Tallinn University, where all this knowledge accumulated by neurosciences and physiological studies are applied to studying relationship between a human participant and artificial agents in narrative context in virtual environments. Thank you very much. Happy to have your questions at the end of the two other talks. Thanks.
That was a great talk by Dr. Pia Tikka. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Isabella Pasqualini. Isabella Pasqualini is a scientist with a PhD in architecture and cognitive neuroscience. Her work explores the mutual and intimate relationship between body and space using immersive and interactive multimedia, with particular interest in the multisensory enhancement of the user's horizon. For her postdoctoral project, Visual Touches, at the Center of Neuroprosthetics, EPFL, she received the prestigious fellowship grant from Cogito Foundation in 2013. She has also been a guest researcher at the Laboratory of Cognitive Neuroscience, EPFL. She is a scientific reviewer and works as an expert for InnoSuisse, as well as other innovation platforms. She has won several international competition prizes, and her work was presented at Swiss and international art venues. We are so happy to have you over here, Doctor. Handing it over to you now.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here and to share some of my work with you. I would like to thank also Pia Tikka for the fantastic talk, which I really enjoyed. And I will start immediately trying to continue on this very interesting subject. So I'd like you to think for a moment about this, what you see in this image of a statue, of a sculpture by a famous artist of the Baroque period. It's by Bernini. And if I put it in words of psychology, what you see here is pure consciousness, because you are getting conscious of an emotion, you're getting conscious of a sensation, and you're getting conscious of agency and of your own body ultimately. And this is achieved by the artist. It's achieved through the representation of the body. And what you see from a psychological point of view are 4 touches. It's a hand touching and being touched, and the body touching and being touched. And the form or the visual are expressing this very prominently. So what I want to introduce as a notion today, which can be very interesting for all of us together to work together, is embodiment. In that what we believe at the lab, I have been working for many years with the Laboratory of Cognitive Neuroscience at EPFL. What we believe is that what we need to know about architecture is the response of the body to the architectonic environment, how it interacts with our consciousness, and how we react to architecture as in an embodied situation in space, and not so much from a photograph or from visuals, from a 2D representation. What you see in this image is the Statue of Liberty from the inside. It's a very famous picture because Rudolf Arnheim, who wrote a famous book, The Dynamics of Architectural Form, he described his experience that when approaching and entering this place, he had a completely different universe in front of himself. So the outside image of architecture and the interior are completely different. They're 2 worlds apart. This phenomenon is also known as the pyramid and the labyrinth. So when we are outside, we see the picture, the image, the embodied image maybe of the building, the volume, but when we are inside, we are immersed in the space. And these 2 experiences can be slightly contradictory in architecture, but it's also, let's say, the central point, the key. And now I want to show you how architecture theory relates to this. Please excuse me for putting 2000 years of architectural theory on one slide, but this is really now to bring it to the point, because what you see on your left-hand side is the Vitruvian idea that very early on, this is a legend, very early on humans gathered and invented the fire, and they developed language, and with that they developed architecture. And 2000 years later, when we're looking at the thinking model, at the primordial hut, which is a thinking model to talk about space and the human needs in space, we still have this fire in the center of the hut. So Semper, if you thought that this was just a little spot or a mistake, it's not. It's the hearth. It's the central element of the hut, and through it we embody the interior. So the interior is some sort of mapping, of exterior mapping to the body. It's a further volume. It's like a cloth. Now, to understand this, let's say as a metaphor, it's really interesting, but what do we do with it in an age of digitalization when we really have other means to access architecture and to access space? So if we look at cognitive space in the cube image on your left-hand side, what you really see is a representation of consciousness, in that here it shows how the brain fills in, of course, to see the cube. But secondly, what you can also see is that you can grasp the whole entity at once. This would be the proof, basically, of those many treatises that have been written during 2000 years of architectural history, because all of them, all the Vitruvian or all the treatises which are based on the Vitruvian books, they speak of this capacity of humans to embody one entire building at once, the lineaments of the building. And when we're looking at it from a scientific point of view, on your right-hand side, this is a representation of embodiment, which was drawn by Mach in the 19th century. So if you look at this, It's slightly problematic because the body becomes an object. So what we want to do in the lab is to study the agency, or to study the feelings of this body, and to study how we relate to the space on an emotional level. What's the theory at hand, or what's the science at hand? Maybe you have heard about peripersonal space, about the different spaces surrounding the body. So peripersonal space is the closer space, the space in which you can reach an object. And here, this is of particular interest for us because we want to know whether the body interacts also with architectural elements or with space in the same way in which it would interact with objects. What you see is on the right-hand side, the rubber hand illusion, which can be used. It's a rubber hand which is slowly starting to replace your own hand on a sensory level and on an emotional level. Through a visual tactile stimulation. That is, we dissociate vision from touch in order to integrate a new element into the body schema, which is the rubber hand. Why does this work? Because there are neurons that in the ventral premotor motor cortex that encode the same portion of space. So what we wanted to know at the lab is whether this applies also to architecture. And we used the paradigm of the full body illusion to do that. It's basically the same paradigm than the one of the rubber hand illusion, where you stimulate the participant's back with a rod, and this image is being projected on the on some VR goggles. So basically the participant sees herself or himself from behind being stroked, and that can be at the same time synchronous or displaced in time in an asynchronous mode. So during synchronicity, what you do is that you identify with the virtual body, and we projected this virtual body in a large interior and in a narrow interior at the laboratory. So this would be the narrow interior, in which you can see on the right hand side what the participant sees, and on the left hand side the setup with the webcam. So it's a 3D recording which is projected to the goggles. And what we did at the end was we tried to understand how embodied this 3D representation was through projecting oneself to the avatar. So we did a distance estimation task. You see it on the right-hand side on the bottom. There was a black line which was laid on the floor, and people had to compare the length of this bar with respect to the first bar they had seen at the very beginning of the experiment. So what happens here is that in the narrow situation where the walls are close to the body, they are inside this peripersonal space. If you don't have this projection into an avatar, the space remains flat. So that means this was the proof on really on a bodily level that the body interacts with architectonic elements. It's not just based on high-level cognitive processing, but it's really an interaction which happens through your body. And to go a step further, there is a lot of theory in architecture. It's called sometimes empathy theory, the empathy debate, and the question whether you project yourself on an object or whether the visuals of the object reverberate in your body, or whether you are maybe immersed in a space. We wanted to understand how this, or to study this phenomenon, and to do that we used as a reference the Armil Ramachandran study, in which they look at how they replace the rubber hand illusion through the simple table. So the introduction is the classic rubber hand illusion, and then they try to transfer the sensation to the table. So we wanted to know whether actually architecture can replace the human body. And our setup at the laboratory was in a small arena. So you see on your right hand side, you have a larger room, and the avatar in front, the extension, and then on the left hand side you have the same room without avatar, and you have the same setup again with the narrow space. So we did the same study as before, but now using the setup with and without avatar. And actually all the effects disappeared. If you take away the human body, the main effects of, you know, tactile illusion through the walls coming closer, or this shifting in space that we found, all these effects disappeared. But the only effect that remained was a stronger effect of immersion in the larger space. So it was relatively weak, but still significant. So all the other architectural feelings, they somehow vanished. So here, the hypothesis that an element or an object could replace the human body, or this projection on the body in a space, that could not be confirmed. In a third study, we tried to relate basically the work that we have done before on emotion, on dimensionality of space, and on the void, on the access to the void in virtual space. We tried to link it to emotion. So here again, you see on your right hand side the rubber hand illusion again, but linked through biofeedback to your heartbeat. And what I wanted to know in this particular case was whether shape, how it was proposed during this empathy debate, whether shape affects the way in which you access the virtual space. So I proposed two interiors. The choices are more artistic. Two interiors, one in which the walls are covered with elements of the human body, and on the left-hand side, more with blobs and abstract elements. So my hypothesis was that on the right-hand side, you would be looking more at the exterior and not so much to an interior. And on the right-hand side, you would be part of the interior. You can see how the bodies glow, and then the blobs glow with your heart rate. And what we found, the control measure of this experiment was an acceleration or a deceleration. What we found was that by modifying the heartbeat, actually you also start modifying the emotion of the participants in correlation to the shape. It doesn't work with every shape. So depending on the shape that you are illuminating and that you are showing in a space in 3D, you can also modulate the emotion of the participant. And at this point, to conclude, or as a takeaway, what I want to say is that to go further to a next step, in order to really be able to do neurocognitive studies, we need to better understand the mechanisms of perception, the cognitive mechanisms in relation to space. And secondly, that architecture truly is something multisensory, so that virtual reality is for sure the medium, that represents it best, and not so much photographs like we have been used in the last maybe 100 years to represent architecture, but that we really start including sound and all kinds of different stimulations in the space. So with that, I'd like to conclude my talk and give my words back to India.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isabella. A quick reminder for the attendees who have joined recently. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section so that we'll get that to the speakers in the panel discussion. And second reminder is about the social media contest, which is running. Please use hashtag Namaste NTX India and hashtag NTX Goes Desi and post it in your social media handles, also tagging the speakers and all your friends. So creative posts will be rewarded with NTX swags. And the third final reminder is please feel free, if you face any problems or any queries, please feel free to post it in the chat. Our prime importance to provide all the attendees a comfortable experience. And now I'll hand over to Kali to introduce one of the most inviting sessions for today.
I think that was a mind-blowing talk on Neuroarchitecture by Dr. Isabella. Hope you all enjoyed the talk. Here we go for the most awaited speaker on Neurocognition by Dr. Eagleman. Dr. Eagleman is a neuroscientist and Neurotime best-selling author and TED speaker and Guggenheim Fellow. He is the writer and presenter of the Emmy-nominated series The Brain on PBS, as well as The Creative Brain on Netflix. Along with teaching at Stanford University, he also runs a neurotech company called Neosensory in Palo Alto, California, and also directs the Center for Science and Law. He is the author for 8 books, including the international bestseller Some, which is a fiction book recently optioned by Netflix, and his newest book titled Live Wire. Personally, I have been a fan of your work on deep brain simulations, sensory substitution, and time perception. We are honored to have you as a speaker for today's event. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Eagleman.
Hi there. Pleasure to be here. I want to present some slides. Can you guys go ahead and enable hosting, screen sharing, I mean? Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Here we go. Going to, so let me know if you guys can see this slide.
Yes, Dr. Eagleman. Is it this?
Okay, great. Okay, well, it's terrific. It's terrific to be here. Thanks very much for having me. So here's what I want to talk to you about today briefly, is this issue about how we perceive reality. And the interesting part is that we're made out of very small stuff, and we're embedded in a very large cosmos. And so we're not very good at perceiving reality, either of those scales. Instead, we've evolved to deal with reality at this very thin slice in between. But even here, at this thin slice, we're not particularly good at seeing most of the action that's going on. So, for example, take the colors of our world. These are light waves that bounce off of objects and hit specialized receptors in the back of our eyes, but we're not seeing all the waves that are out there. What you see is less than a 10 trillionth of what is out there. So you have radio waves and microwaves and X-rays and gamma rays, and these are all passing through your body right now, and you're completely unaware of it because your biology doesn't come with the receptors to pick that up. And there are thousands of cell phone conversations passing through you right now, and you're completely blind to it. Now, it's not that these things are unseeable. Snakes include some infrared in their reality, and honeybees include ultraviolet in their view of the world. And of course, we build machines in our cars to pick up on the radio range, and machines in the hospitals to pick up on the X-ray range, and so on. But you can't sense any of these right now because you don't come equipped with the proper sensors to do so. And what this means is that our experience of reality is actually constrained by our biology. And that goes against the common sense notion that our eyes and our ears and our fingertips are just picking up the objective reality that's out there. Instead, our brains are sampling just a little bit of the world. Now, across the animal kingdom, different animals pick up on different parts of reality. So in the blind and deaf world of the tick, the important signals are temperature and butyric acid. For the black ghost knifefish, its sensory world is lavishly colored by electrical fields. For the echolocating bat, it's constructed by air compression waves. And that's the slice of their ecosystem they can pick up on this. They can pick up on it. We have a word for this in science. It's called the Umwelt, which is the German word for the surrounding world. Now, presumably, every animal assumes that its Umwelt is the entire objective reality out there, because why would you ever stop to imagine that there's something beyond what you can sense? Instead, we all accept reality as it's presented to us. So let's do a consciousness razor on this. Imagine that you are a bloodhound dog and your whole world is about smelling. So you have a long snout that has 200 million scent receptors in it, and you have wet nostrils that attract and trap scent molecules, and you have slits in your nostrils so you can take big nosefuls of air. Everything is about smell to you. So one day you stop in your tracks with a revelation and you look at your human owner and you think, what is it like to have the pitiful little nose of a human? What is it like to not know that you know, there's a cat 100 yards away, or that your neighbor was right here 6 hours ago? So because we're humans, we've never experienced that world of smell, so we don't miss it because we're firmly settled into our Umwelt. But the question that I want to ask is, do we have to be stuck there? And so as a neuroscientist, I'm interested in the way that technology might expand our Umwelt and how that's going to change the experience of what it means to be a human. So many of you probably already know that there are hundreds of thousands of people walking around with artificial hearing and artificial vision. And what you do in this is you take a digital microphone and you slip it into the ear, and people can come to hear, or you take a digital camera and you plug an electrode grid into the back of the eye and people can come to see. But the interesting thing is that as recently as about 20 years ago, there were a lot of scientists who thought these technologies were never going to work. And the reason is because these technologies speak the language of Silicon Valley, and it's not exactly the same dialect as your natural biological sense organs. But the fact is that it works just fine. People can figure out how to use these. And how do we understand that, the fact that these work? And of course, the secret comes down to this, which is that your brain is not directly hearing or seeing any of this. Your brain is locked in a vault of silence and darkness inside your skull. All it ever sees are electrochemical signals that come in along different data cables. And this is all it has to work with and nothing more. Now, amazingly, the brain is really good at taking in these signals and extracting patterns and assigning meaning. So it takes this inner cosmos and puts together a story of this, your subjective world. But the key point I want to make here is that your brain doesn't know, and it doesn't care where it gets the data from. Whatever information comes in, your brain just figures out what to do with it. And this is a very efficient kind of machine. It's essentially a general purpose computing device. It just takes in everything and it figures out what it's going to do with it. And that, I think, frees up Mother Nature to tinker around with different sorts of input channels. And so I call this the pH model of evolution. And I don't want to get too technical here, but pH stands for potato head. And I use this name to emphasize that all these sensors that we know and love, like our eyes and our ears and our fingertips and our noses, these are merely peripheral plug and play devices. You stick them in and you're good to go. The brain figures out what to do with the data that comes in. And when you look across the animal kingdom, you find lots of peripheral devices. So snakes have heat pits with which to detect infrared, and the ghost knifefish has electroreceptors, and the star-nosed mole has this appendage with 22 fingers on it with which it feels around its world. And birds have specializations to orient to the magnetic field of the planet. And so what this means is that nature doesn't have to continually redesign the brain. Instead, once she has established the principles of brain operation, all she has to do is worry about designing new peripheral devices and just plug them in. And so the lesson that surfaces here is that there's nothing really special or fundamental about the biology that we happen to come to the table with. It's just what we've inherited from a complex road of evolution, but it's not what we have to stick with. And our best proof of principle for this comes from what's called sensory substitution. And that refers to feeding information into the brain via unusual sensory channels, and the brain figures out what to do with it. Now, that might sound speculative, but the first paper demonstrating this was published in the journal Nature in 1969. A scientist named Paul Bach-y-Rita put blind people in a modified dental chair, and he set up a video feed, and he would put something in front of the camera, and then whatever was in front of the camera, you'd feel that poked into your back with a grid of solenoids. So if you wiggle a coffee cup in front of the camera, you feel that in your back. And amazingly, people got pretty good at being able to determine what was in front of the camera just by feeling it in the small of their back. Now, there have been many modern incarnations of this for blind people. The sonic glasses take a video feed right in front of you and turn that into a sound landscape. So as things are moving around and get closer and farther, it sounds like a cacophony, but after several weeks, blind people start getting pretty good at understanding what is in front of them just based on what they're hearing. And it doesn't have to be through the ears. This system uses an electrotactile grid on the forehead. So whatever is in front of the video feed, you're feeling it on your forehead. The most modern incarnation is called the brain port. This is a little electrotactile grid that sits on your tongue. And the video feed gets turned into these little shocks on your tongue. It feels like pop rocks. And blind people can get so good at using this that they can throw a ball into a basket, or they can navigate complex obstacle courses. They can come to see through their tongue. Now, that all sounds completely insane, right? But remember, all vision ever is electrochemical signals coursing around in your brain. Your brain doesn't know where the signals come from. It just figures out what to do with them. So my lab set out to solve sensory substitution for the deaf. And we wanted to make it so that when you say something in the world, that sound is converted in some way so that a deaf person can understand what is being said. So we built a vest with vibratory motors. Think of the little motor in your cell phone, but we have lots of them all over the vest. And they represent frequencies from low to high frequency. And this is just what your inner ear does. We've just transferred this to the torso. So here's what the video looks like here. So as I'm speaking, the sound is getting translated into dynamic patterns of vibration. I'm feeling the sonic world around me. Okay, so you get the idea. The sound is, the vest is capturing sound and turning that into patterns of vibration. So we've been testing that with deaf people now for about 6 years. And so this is just to give you a quick sense of what this looks like. Here's the woman on the left saying the word sound. On the right, she's saying the word touch. And you can see, if you pay attention, you can see what the patterns are and how they're responding to the sound with almost no latency. So here's our very first participant. My graduate student, Scott, is sitting on the right. The student sitting on the deaf participant is sitting on the left. So Scott's going to say a word. You. He says the word you. So Jonathan, the participant, feels it on the vest and he writes it on the board. So Scott's going to say another word. Where. Where. So he says where. And Jonathan, who's totally deaf, is able to translate this complicated pattern of vibrations. Touch. Touch. He's translating it into an understanding of what's being said. And he's not doing this consciously because the patterns are too complicated, but his brain is unlocking the pattern. And you know, think of it like when a blind person passes her finger over Braille, the meaning comes directly off the page without her having to think about, oh, there's a little bump here and there's a little bump here. She just does that in exactly the same way that when you read a book, you're just looking at the letters and it comes off the page. So this technology has the potential to be a game changer because the only other solution for deafness is a cochlear implant, and that's about $100,000 and an invasive surgery. So the vest can be built for, you know, so much less expensive than that. And this opens up the technology globally, even for the poorest places in the world. I'll just mention we've made a smaller version of the vest for children who are deaf, and we've been testing this. But the main thing is we've now shrunk this down to the size of a wristband, and that opens this up for everybody to have this, because this is about $399, and it captures sound. It has a whole microprocessor inside that's doing very sophisticated things of capturing sound, turning it into patterns of vibration, doing all sorts of noise cancellation and cleanup, stuff like that. And we now have this on wrists all over the world. I'll just give you a sense. This is our very first participant here. He's wearing a much older version of this. He's the president of the San Francisco Deaf Association. And this is just a moment of him talking about what it meant to him. So we've had, many participants just write to us and tell us about things that they're picking up on that they didn't even expect to. It's been a very cool thing for us to learn about as well, what they see. And the other thing we're doing right now is trying to get our wristband into deaf schools all over the world. And because this is 250th the cost of a cochlear implant, it gives us that opportunity. I just want to quickly tell you that we're doing many, many things beyond deafness. So, for example, we're working with prosthetics. So when somebody gets a prosthetic leg, they have a difficult time learning how to walk with it because they're not getting any feedback from it. So we can put sensors all over the leg so that you can feel the feedback on your torso, and then you can learn how to walk with it. So we're allowing patients to learn how to walk again this way. So how can we use a technology like this to add a completely new kind of sense to expand the human Umwelt? For example, could we feed real-time data from the internet directly into somebody's brain, and could they develop a direct perceptual experience? So here's an experiment that we did in the lab where so here's a gentleman wearing the vest, and we're feeding in a real-time stream of internet data. And then two buttons are going to appear on his tablet. He makes a choice. He doesn't know what's going on, but he gets feedback a little bit later. And what he doesn't know is that what we're feeding him is real-time data from the stock market, and he's making buy and sell decisions. And the feedback is telling him whether he did the right thing or not. And what we're seeing is, can we expand the human Umwelt so that he comes to have a direct perceptual experience of the economic movements of the planet? Another thing we're doing, we can scrape the web for any hashtag and do an automated sentiment analysis, which means, are people using positive words or negative words or neutral? And this allows a person to feel what's going on and to be plugged into the aggregate emotion of thousands of people in real time. And that's a new kind of human experience, because you can now know how the population is feeling in real time. It's a bigger experience than a human can normally have. And we're doing all kinds of things like, replacing the drug dog by having a molecular detector that picks up on things and feeds you the information instead of through your nose. It feeds it through a molecular detector. So we're doing this with robotic surgery, where you can feel what's going on with the patient. Instead of looking up at all the monitors, you feel the state of the patient. We've been doing this with drone pilots, where the drone is feeding the pitch, yaw, roll, orientation, and heading of the drone into the vest. So it's essentially like you've got your skin extended up there, far away. The pilot becomes one with the drone, and this helps them to fly in the dark and in the fog and things like that. We're doing things, just as an example, with VR, where you're experiencing what's going on in the VR world by feeling what's happening behind you in any direction that way. We've also done this with social VR, where you can have people feeling each other in the VR. They can actually be touching each other, and you feel what's going on. I'm a scientific advisor for the show Westworld, and so we put our vest into that. I now call this Vest World. And I don't know if anyone would have seen this season 2, episode 7, but anyway, there's our vest on the screen. And if you look at this guy in the middle here, he's wearing the vest. You can see the lights coming on. And so what the vest allows him to do is have a direct sense of where the hosts are. He's feeling where their location is on the vest around him. And the closer they are, the stronger it's felt. And the farther they are, the farther away, and so on. In this other scene, you know, the vest buzzes and suddenly they find there's a bad robot there, and so on. But this idea is the same idea that we're using in real life for people who are blind. So people who are blind, we set it up so that they can feel exactly what's happening around them, where all the people are around them. And on top of that, we can add navigation. So we add, you know, go straight, go to the right, go to the left, and so on. So people who are blind, in a sense, get better vision than a normal person has. So anyway, there are many, many projects we're pursuing. And I think there's really no end to the possibilities on the horizon for human expansion. So just imagine an astronaut being able to feel the overall health of the International Space Station, or having you feel the invisible states of your own body, or seeing in infrared or ultraviolet. So the key is this: as we move into the future, we're going to increasingly be able to choose our own peripheral devices. We no longer have to wait for Mother Nature's sensory gifts on her timescales, because instead, like any good parent, she's given us the tools we need to go out and define our own trajectory. So the question is, how do you want to go out and experience your universe? Thanks very much.
So thank you so much, Dr. Eagleman. It was like wonderful, and if you have noticed, there were so many wows in the chat section. It was like really amazing, and they're going to show there are certain commands which say, "I'm going to watch the West World right now." So it was very, very interesting, and so I'd love to invite Yannick Roy for the panel discussion, to lead the panel discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Eagleman. Yeah.
Great. By the way, let me just mention one other thing. If anybody is interested in this, we are having another developer contest at NeoSensory. So if anyone wants to build a new sense, keep an eye on neosensory.com and submit to our contest.
We will definitely make sure to share that through the NeuroTechX channels for sure. Been a huge fan for many years, so we'll definitely continue sharing that kind of a DIY hackers challenge as well, which we find really interesting for the community. So hi everyone. My name is Yannick Roy, co-founder of NeuroTechX. I'm excited to host and moderate this panel discussion. I think that they were fantastic talks. So just before we go into the question, while Brian, Mohit, Karthik, Swela, and all the team is currently aggregating all the questions from the chat and the audience, I will just share my screen quickly for a brief NeuroTechX introduction for the one that are not necessarily familiar with the organization. So NeuroTechX is an international neurotech community. The mission is to facilitate the advancement of the field of neurotechnology. So it's a very broad and ambitious mission. We do that mainly by focusing on 3 pillars: community, education, and innovation. So the thesis is really that we want to connect people. Then we want to provide educational resources. So whether it's more technical, scientific, more business, ethics, and we believe that once people are connected, they know who's doing what, and then they have the information and the knowledge, the know-how, then they can go on and have an impact, whether it's by joining a company, starting one, tackling a challenge in the field that remains unsolved. So we really see ourselves as a platform where we do have many different initiatives. Just to name a few that we're known for are NeuroTechX chapters. So we have about more than 25 chapters around the world in different places. We're happy to have NeuroTechX India aboard the NeuroTechX family, the student club as well, mainly focusing on undergrads so that they can start learning and exploring the field of neurotech as early as possible in their career. Our Slack platform, 5,200 members chatting, engaging on different discussions and conversation. The EDU platform, providing different resources, tutorials, workshops, kind of thing, where you can learn different aspects of neurotech. Newsletter as well, just kind of a monthly recap, digest in the field, from science news to investment to new products, things like that. So definitely, if you're not subscribed, I think that this is a fantastic monthly digest just to keep informed of what's happening in the field. Databases, we're about to release our industry and academia ecosystem, so mapping the whole world of neurotech. So we've been working hard at it, and we're about to release that publicly. It's free. You can just, you'll be able to search who's doing what in what city and different kind of technology around the field. Our book as well, Neurotech Primer, coming up very, very shortly, basically answering all the questions that we've had over the past 5 years of existence. So now we can answer, when we have questions, we can just answer, go get the book, and the answers are all there. More recently, our services as well, trying to help with recruiting and consulting. So if there is any company in need for help, and if there is any talent, we're trying to facilitate that connection between the two. So I won't go into too much detail about Neurotech X, because I think that the meat of today really is the panel discussion that we're all excited about. So let's just dive right into it. I would invite the speakers to open their camera, which is done already. And then we'll just, you can unmute yourself, and I will ask you the question from the audience. So let me just go in the list from the team. So first question, more general for all of you. How will these use cases of neurotech shape our daily life beyond full adoption? Are there limitations to this? So this is kind of a very broad question, obviously, but how do you see shaping our daily life beyond full adoption? So I don't know if Dr. Pia Tika, you want to take a first stab at it?
I think that these technologies, for example, what David described, that help people, disabled people, people with like functional physiological problems, help them to kind of adapt and live a normal life like we do. They are highly appreciated and needed. What I want to emphasize really is that what has been found out is that technological innovations very much focus on so-called normal healthy people who have all the senses in order. So all the technological developments very to a great extent focus on kind of thinking of those people, but we should really concentrate on thinking of how these neurotechnologies can help people who have like real problems to survive in the world. Thanks.
I'd like to follow up on that, in that a very important application could be the urban space. Let's say as we move on with digitalization and the 5G network is coming soon, we could build urban interiors which are much more open and accessible for all age groups, let's say for children, for elderly people, for disabled people. This is not the case today. So technology could become like an additional layer which brings in a selective way, brings in stimuli so that you could be conducted or you could be led through the space. And let's say this is just the last layer, because at the bottom you want to build cities that are more inclusive, that have this universal access, let's say, that can be used in many different ways, and no way is wrong. And so therefore we need to know more about people. We spend a lot of money in building cities and in building houses, but we hardly know the inhabitants. So we should really dig a little bit deeper into that. And then, of course, there are technological applications like gaming, like, you know, where you really want to represent space, or you want to deliver more emotions through space. So finally, it's also to understand that there is an emotional part in the built environment that is really important, I think, or in the space which surrounds us in general.
Cool. I guess I'll go, which is I have a suspicion that we're all going to start adding new senses in very soon. I mean, this is already, on the market and it's happening. But the interesting part is we don't know how many senses we can add. So we know you can add a sixth sense and probably a seventh and probably an eighth and ninth. And the brain is very good at sharing its real estate. So, we might be right on the cusp of becoming a very different kind of species than we have been in terms of the information we pick up. We don't have to pick up just a very narrow little channel of things. One of the interesting things to me, and I just wrote about this in my book Livewired, is this issue about what's called qualia, our internal experience of something. So, vision feels a certain way to you, and hearing feels a certain way, and taste, and so on. And you would never get these mixed up with one another. You would never hear a sound and think it was a smell or a sight. And so the interesting part is it looks all the same on the inside. It's all just spikes on the inside. And so one of my big areas of research right now is what a new sense comes to feel like. In other words, if I feed in stock market data, how it doesn't come to feel like smell or hearing or touch or taste or anything, but a different thing, a new kind of thing. And of course, it's impossible to imagine in the same way that if I asked you to imagine a new color, you wouldn't be able to do it. And so we're limited by what we've experienced. But when you experience something new, you have a new internal subjective quality to it. And the interesting part to me is what's going to happen when we all start having new senses, but we can't communicate those to each other easily, because language is about shared experience. But if someone has an experience that you don't have, what's the way we're going to talk about it? So those are some of the things I'm thinking about.
This is fascinating, actually, and we've had someone in the audience asking in the same vein a little bit of like, how do we communicate new concepts or new thing? And someone asked tech to communicate with our animals, especially given the use case of animal therapy in neuropsychiatric conditions. What is the potential of multisensory communication? So is there something with animal that we can explore and to help us communicate?
Well, I would like to just jump here saying that I've been just collaborating with the future researchers of the future, and one of the dreams that those people have in the future is that we would actually be able to have a language, so communicate with plants and with animals. But I just want to credit, of course, David mentioned Umwelt, and just want to mention that I'm actually now in the country, in Estonia, where Jacob von Uexküll actually worked with this concept of Umwelt in early 1900s. So that was fun to see in your presentation, and actually that exactly relates to the question that how far, I mean, basically we think of human consciousness, animal consciousness. How can we actually ever understand? Are we ever always bound to these bubbles of our humanness, and also bubbles of our individual humanness, which can be very different from the experience of another human? And so this is very challenging and exciting field. Yeah.
I think that we might be able to expand our senses to better understand slightly what it is to pick up the signals of, let's say, a dog. But communication, I don't actually know how to do that, because to communicate with the dog in a meaningful way requires them to understand something about what it's like to be a human. So I actually don't have any insight into how to use this to communicate with animals.
So we'll have to better understand our own communication with new concepts and new senses before we think about improving our communication with our beloved ones, animal.
It may be that an animal's brain is just sufficiently different from ours that whatever we try to say to the animal just doesn't have any meaning to them. Yeah.
This is the issue between like human experience and animal experience. But I would say that there still is some kind of a sense of co-presence. Maybe there's something embodied, something that relates to us being organisms, and 37-degree blood circulating in our bloods, and having different kind of senses with different dimensions. So maybe there is some connection between animals and humans, and even with plants, as people go out and hug trees. So to be found out.
Interesting. So as you just mentioned, David, about the language and the brain of animals, let's go back to one of the things that you mentioned during your talk about the tech that speak the Silicon Valley language, which is not the biological one. So some of the big names recently came out and talk about digitalizing the brain to some extent, whether it's kernel with memory enhancement, whether it's Neuralink, Elon Musk talking about increasing the bandwidth of the brain to fight AI, and all these claims. What is your take? And it's open to the three of you about digitalizing the brain and make it more digital, and or so either the technology talking the language of the brain, or the brain talking the language of the technology. Do you think that it's possible, and what are the next steps in that direction?
Just to put it in context, the issue is, how do we read and write with the brain? And so our best, most people in the audience probably know this, but just to be clear, our best technologies are pretty crude right now. We use things like fMRI, which captures chunks of the brain with millions of neurons in it. And what we really want to be able to do is, read individual neurons, let's say all 86 billion of them in real time, and we're very distant from that. And so what both Musk and Johnson and many others are proposing are new technologies to try to get at that a little bit better. So what Neuralink is doing is just sewing electrodes into the brain so you can read lots of them. And people are trying all kinds of technology with this, and this is where we need to go, because it's funny that all of our theories about the brain are going to be very limited until we can actually read it much better.
Any take? Yep.
I think that it is already happening in a way. If you take, for instance, a cab driver using a GPS, we know that the capacity to navigate space is getting very poor. So somehow we are extending our consciousness, and if we use Google, streets a lot, then suddenly we start forgetting a little bit how to navigate space ourselves. So I think that is happening, and happening also as these gadgets become wearable, and they become affordable, and they work, they're more solid, you can rely on them. So that is happening, maybe not in that futuristic and sensational way that we expected, but it's happening in many little ways. But then sometimes what I observe in architecture is that the more we try to do something, for instance, to take away the pressure from the environment, let's say the question of before, so that we can take more care of the environment, the more actually we put stress on it, and the worse it is for the environment. So sometimes I wonder how we can really design these things to come together. So a more sustainable life, with more sustainable objects, and with more sustainable, physical environment that can afford actually the life of the future. To me, that is a very specific task that we are not so close. We're not coming close to an answer right now.
Also, I would like to add to Isabella's point also that what is the actually the I mean even if we could map all the plausible links in the brain, but where is the meaning making core of our existence? And so it cannot only be inside our head, it has to extend outside to the world, as Isabella is saying, to the surfaces, the feel of the spaces, and in terms of understanding our history, the full history, life history, but also like having understanding of the whole range of, so machines and Google has a lot of that information already stored, but it doesn't provide meaning. So this is kind of crucial question in this kind of futuristic idea of mapping brain and building artificial agents that are intelligent. And I confess I do dream about that myself when I work with my artificial characters that are like driven by biofeedback. So David, I would like to maybe try some of your specific sensors to drive my kind of transfer participants' experience to the artificial character, so that the artificial character can adapt to that and create this kind of loop of co-presence between the artificial character and the human. It's a wonderful playground. And because partly this, I think this session is specifically for arts and culture and like a little bit more like for the imagination also. So artificial intelligence is just a wonderful playground for, and as I mentioned in my presentation, it has been a dream of people since back in the history. So philosophers have played with this idea and a lot. But yeah, but what I would like to emphasize is that I don't personally believe that in the future we can transport all the human likeness and humanism into an artificial, independently working artificial agent. But I do believe that symbiotic relationship between human and artificial entity may be possible in the future.
So just to continue a little bit in that direction, so can we use so someone on YouTube asked, can we use Neurocinematics to induce a behavior in a person? So to change behavior, make a person motivated in a field aspect better. So can we, yeah. So can you, I'm not going to rephrase that a question, can we use Neurocinematics to induce a behavior?
So we are talking about the propagandistic brainwashing and mind engineering. Yes, we can, but I always reply to this question that you don't need neurosciences for that. I mean, Hollywood did that already, and all the narrative drama writers did that already. So they changed people's behavior by showing films. And you don't need any neurosciences for that because the creators have brains in their heads and they can create this kind of experiences. But definitely, I mean, so my answer would be films change people, and with neurosciences we can see if cues that or narrative storylines that we've implemented into those films, that if they have some affect and that we expect or assume people to have, but so this was my reply to that. Not very exciting from neurotechnology point of view, I assume.
No, but it's very, like with NeuroTechX, we cover 360. So it's very interesting that we get something that we're not necessarily the tech itself. So I find it very, very interesting. And this is why I want to ask the panel. I know that we're running a bit out of time at the moment. Can I keep you a bit longer for another maybe 10 minutes of questions, since we still have a few questions? I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but it's not every day that we get this opportunity. Yes? Awesome. So another question from Zoom, maybe more for Dr. Pascalini. Given that architecture is one of the few design mediums that requires full physical interaction, how can we create spaces that support increased mind-body connection, especially in context to autism, children with NDDs?
I think that this is a main field of application. And in fact, there's some research which is being done on that. In that autism is really also an overload of stimuli. So the environment can contribute a lot for these people to be more integrated. And I think that, in fact, it could be, I mean, this is purely hypothetical. It could be also, there could be a technological layer in between, but in that you could add or extract information from the environment. But this really needs to be tested. I mean, we have to test this at the lab and we have to do experiments. And there's a long way to go until it can be implemented. We have really, I mean, the construction industry has a certain way to go. And there is a very high pressure when building environments, and there's a big amount of money which is involved. So basically, you have to do the experiments at the lab. You cannot do the experiment on the building site, or when building a new building or a new square. You really have to test it at the lab beforehand. So this will take a lot of time. This will take also to put all the data together. For all respective cases and possibilities and environments. So this is a lot of research which still needs to be done.
Very, very interesting. If we go back to bring all that we've seen together, so Ari Prasad on Zoom asked, at the convolution of all the topics that we've seen today, is it at all possible to use such a device, for example, the one described by Dr. David Eagleman, to have a holistic experience of a movie where the user creates their own path based on a virtual environment and interactions with other characters? So we've seen something like that in the Black Mirror Bandersnatch movie.
I think that's a terrific idea. What do you guys think?
I wanted to add that, in fact, I think it could represent space. You know, there's no reason why, if following this neuroarchitectural thinking, there's no reason why you could not induce certain spatial feelings in people of a space which is not there. So absolutely, I'm sure that this can be done.
Did the question actually focus on virtual reality or inside the Yannick?
Yeah, more. I mean, if you're asking if in VR.
Yes, was the question especially focusing on inside VR or inside
based on a virtual environment? I guess that the main question is.
Yes. I just missed that part of the question. So in virtual reality, basically, it provides us wonderful possibilities for playing around with all these tools and all these aspects that have been discussed here with the space and so on and so on. But what is crucial is that we always bring our biological body into the space. So we cannot do there everything we want to do there due to our body. That's still like is physically grounded to the ground, but we can do a lot of things with added sensory systems, as David was describing, and also setups where we can actually meet ourselves in the environment and so on. So, but just we have to always remember that kind of our body restricts our experience also in virtual reality.
You know what I'd say though, and I wrote about this in Livewired recently, because I just feel like VR gives us the best opportunity to try out different body types. And the lesson from that has been that people can learn that up very rapidly, like having a third arm that you control, or having a lobster body or things like that. And so it seems like there's some flexibility there with the homunculus, the system that, your motor system that drives your body. But the other thing I just want to mention, Isabella, which is cool, is we have noticed that when it comes to spatial issues, when we're feeding information in, it's very intuitive to pick up on new spatial issues. So what I mean is, if we're feeding in information about, let's say, a drone or something, you really have to learn that, or like stock market, you really have to learn that with practice. But when we took blind people and we told them, hey, there's somebody coming this way on your right and you can feel it, there's someone walking around behind you and you can feel them on your skin and so on, it was zero learning curve. People immediately got it and they understood how to think about spatial concepts on their skin, where things get more intense the closer it gets and so on. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to try out super cool things in terms of space. So we can all keep in touch about that and see if we can make something happen.
Yes, sure.
So
I think also just adding there that that our imagination also works to help the adaptation. So it's true that even in real life, I mean, people learn to ride bicycle when upside down when their vision is turned upside down, which is a classical study where you learn to ride your bike, seeing the world upside down. Everybody should try upside down worlds once in a while. It feels quite fun. So and what is nice about also, David, your point is of the skin is that it's our largest organ that we have if we think of our different body parts as separate organs. So skin is our largest, if my understanding is right, largest organ, and it's full with senses. So imagine that we actually would really. I mean, if we imagine that somebody is behind, if I start to imagine somebody's behind me in the room, horror film thing, so I start to feel that person. And that's what we did when I had a virtual reality meeting with several panel members, and we were there as avatars. So at the end of the meeting, we had created such a nice feel of the panelship as we have here now. So what we could do with our avatar bodies, we hugged, we had a group hug. And it was funny, but even though each one of us was separately in our lonely rooms with wearing headset and with no bodily sensors, I mean, we shared the feeling that we could actually share the hug, feel the hug in our body, because of the imagination, the body-brain system kind of creating that, constructing that experience for us. So there's a lot of things we can experience when we are just brave and go ahead.
I think that virtual hugging in a COVID situation is relevant. One last question to wrap this up. So when we're a kid, we ask our friends what superpower we would like to have. So since we're not kids anymore, but scientists, I would like to ask you, what would be not your superpower, but a new sense? If everything was possible in the sense that your brain could learn a new sense, what new sense would you like to have?
I'll jump in there. I'm experimenting with infrared and ultraviolet because, I showed at the beginning this thing how little of the electromagnetic spectrum we actually perceive, and I suspect that there are dozens of really incredible things to discover out there just by walking around in our daily life and picking up on these parts of the spectrum and having some access to them. So that's mine.
I guess that seeing a couple of temporal dimensions together, I don't mean in terms of past or future, but because that would be too sequential, but just in the sense that sometimes things could be happening together or instead of each other, because sometimes you get intuitions and then you have no idea where that came from. And I wonder, maybe that's almost a perspective from the future that came back to you. So I wonder whether that could be made more tangible in a sense.
maybe then I would just go for hugging, but that would be a very painful experience. On the other hand, when I have my daily salad, cutting the salad into pieces. But yeah, maybe something like that.
So what was the beginning? Sorry, for me it cut a little bit for the beginning.
I was just saying hugging the trees. I love old big trees, and so I would love to have the sense of just the co-presence with them. And actually, there is one tree which is the Christmas tree type of, I don't know what is that that in English, which I have very special feeling towards, and I think that's because Finnish people, I'm Finnish, so Finnish people have been living in forests for such a long time in the like evolution generation back, that these trees actually talk to us.
I love it. Definitely in favor of adding new sense towards more empathy and being more connected. So yep, I love that. I love that new sense. To close so thank you very much for the speaker. I would like to offer the platform if there is any message, any last word that any of you three would like to share with the audience right now, and or when people watch it on YouTube later, if there is anything where they can follow you, follow your work. Any last word before we wrap this session up? David, I'll let you start first.
I would just say follow what we're doing at neosensory.com, and we're going to be having a new developer contest soon, and so keep an eye out for that. And if you want to know more about these issues, I just had my book come out called Live Wired, which is all about the plasticity of the brain.
Awesome. Dr. Pascalini, do you want to?
I hope to be able to show a new installation very soon that I couldn't show today, but I'm working with a choreographer on a virtual space, a virtual dance place. So I hope that we might be streaming that, or that we can show that eventually.
Awesome, love it. The NTX Indian team will definitely make sure to keep an eye on that so that we can also share when it's ready to be shared. And last but not least.
Well, just Google Pia Tikka and Enactive Virtuality Lab and check out what we are doing. And please drop me an email if you are interested in about knowing more.
Awesome. Thank you very much for this panel discussion. I really enjoyed it. I think that we could talk about definitely qualia and consciousness and all these things for a very long time, but we're limited in time. So we'll keep that for NeuroBar. So I'll lend it back to the NTX India team to wrap up and invite you to follow up discussion at the NeuroBar after we close this one. So thank you very much for everyone, and back to Karthik.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm Karthik, actually. I'm the chapter lead at NTX India. So I was very, very excited. So before giving the final note from NTX India, I'd like to get my wonderful team who has worked hard to put up this webinar. I'd like to, I request them to switch on the video. Is my voice audible?
Yes, it is, Karthik.
Okay, great. So now my wonderful team is on the video. So we would like to give you an Indian style. We'd like to thank you with an Indian style. So thank you so much for all the speakers and the attendees who came out. So NTX India and NTX is like really honored to have all of you in this webinar. So on a personal note, say I've read about all three of you even before thinking of having you as speakers, but with respect to Dr. David Eagleman, I've read your research papers, your book. I'm currently reading one of your books about the brain, and I've also seen your documentaries, and like all of us are a very big fan of yours, and we are following you very regularly, and also Neurosensory and Dr. Pia Tikka. This kind of field is completely new, even when we proposed to, we have got speakers from Neurocinematics and Neuroarchitecture that was like completely new, and our teams were like really, really happy, and thank you so much for that. So one more thing is, so at NTX and NTX India, we have like super passionate people who are craving to be a part of the future building using neurotechnology and neuroscience. So we would always like to get your support for NTX and NTX India. It's a huge opportunity and an honor to have you all So I don't have words to say. We're just very, very excited to have all three of you here. So we'd like to hear from you. So on behalf of NTX and NTX India, we'd like to hear certain words, final words about the attendees and NTX and NTX India, and certain motivational words would really excite the attendees. If possible, Dr. David.
Oh, yeah, I would just say we're at the foot of the mountain as far as neuroscience goes. When I went to my very first conference, the Society for Neuroscience, 25 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, look at all these people. I'm sure all the questions have been solved or are about to be solved. But here I am a quarter of a century later, and I now understand that we know so little about what's going on with the brain. So you guys are getting in at a great time, and there's just an infinite amount to do and to discover. And I'll look forward to seeing what this group comes up with over the next quarter century.
Thank you so much. Dr. Piatica or Dr. Pasqualini, want to say something?
Well, I would also kind of a little bit adopt from David saying is that I'm coming on filmmaking side. So what is very important for everybody to understand that your discipline is doesn't prevent you from jumping into another discipline and kind of joining forces in studying mind consciousness and understanding the embodiment and so on. So there are problems if you come from arts and creative sides. There are issues that you kind of need to take into account, which is that in some sense still today as an artist you have to actually adapt to neuroscientific world. Neurosciences so far have not really adapted to creative artist world, but I think this is changing with especially this multidisciplinary work that we are doing. So just encouraging everybody just to cross your disciplinary borders and search for your interest and put your energy to what you want to do.
Thank you so much. Dr. Pasqualini, we'll say the final words.
I think that the biggest learning that I have made through neuroscience was to come to emotion and actually to learn about a lot of novel emotions like familiarity, identity, which are so important in architecture. And as you can trigger emotion, basically you can start to manipulate the other senses in a way. So this was something that really that I learned through these studies, and I think that if we don't study this, if we don't do all these experiments, we might be losing that skill that I have tried to show from the beginning, this representation of embodiment of this statue, that this is actually a craftsmanship that we used to have and that is slowly getting lost. And eventually there will be a day where we have, or very soon, we have to teach bots how we use a house. So we have to get ready for that, actually. We have to know how to do that, because otherwise we will lose everything that we really need, or we will adapt to certainly to different styles and different things. But actually it's really important to bring into another language, let's say, to communicate with the machine what the living environment is.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the inspirational words. So you have spent like 2 hours, but the 2 hours is very, very valuable for all the attendees. And so one gift that we can give to the speakers is that we will assure you that, so we have around 5,000 plus members in NeuroTechX. We will assure you that we will join hands together and help contribute in building a great neurotech future. Thank you so much. That's the gift that we're presenting, and we promise you that for sure. So now the final announcement is going to be about the Neuro bar. So the Neuro bar link will be up on the chat section. It's going to be a direct face-to-face interaction and a networking session with some of the speakers, but also we'd love to have the speakers if you're available at the Neuro bar, so that it would be a great opportunity for the attendees to interact with you. So feel free to join if you have some time reminding, and feel free to drop out if you have some other works. And thank you so much for all the attendees and the speakers who have attended this session. So I'm just really very sad that this session is going to end and the webinar is going to end. But for sure, we'll be reaching out to these 3 speakers again for sure for any other upcoming webinar or session. Thank you so much for your support. That's my final note. So then we'll go to the Neuro bar. Thank you so much, speakers and attendees. Thank you, sir.
Much.
Thank you.